In 1995, something quiet but extraordinary happened in Yellowstone National Park. 30 gray wolves were released into the wild. There were no cameras waiting for a spectacle, no immediate signs that anything had changed. And yet, over the next 2 decades, forests would return, rivers would shift their paths, and an entire ecosystem would reorganize itself. All because one missing animal came back. To understand why this mattered, you have to go back nearly a century. Wolves were once a natural part of Yellowstone, but by the early 1900s, they were viewed as a threat. They were hunted aggressively, poisoned, trapped, and eliminated. By 1926, the last known wolves in the park were killed. What followed seemed harmless at first. Elk numbers increased, which many people saw as a success. More elk meant more hunting opportunities and more visible wildlife. But the system was already slipping out of balance. Without wolves, elk behavior changed. They no longer needed to stay alert, and they spent long periods grazing in the same areas, especially along rivers and streams where water and soft vegetation were easy to access. Young willow, aspen, and cottonwood trees were eaten before they could grow tall enough to survive. Over time, entire stands of trees disappeared. Riverbanks lost the roots that held them together. Soil eroded into streams. Water warmed and slowed. Fish populations declined. Birds that depended on trees for nesting vanished. The landscape did not collapse suddenly. It thinned, simplified, and degraded. By the 1960s and the 1970s, ecologists began noticing something was wrong. Yellowstone looked wild, but it was missing complexity. The absence of wolves had removed a crucial form of control. Wolves were not just predators that reduced elk numbers. They influenced where elk moved, how long they stayed, and how they used the land. That pressure was gone. After years of scientific debate, political resistance, and public controversy, a decision was made. Wolves would be reintroduced. In 1995 and 1996, 30 gray wolves from Canada were captured, transported, and released into Yellowstone. The project was risky. Ranchers feared livestock losses. Hunters worried about competition. Some local communities strongly opposed the idea, but the wolves stayed. At first, the changes were subtle. Wolves hunted elk, but the most important shift wasn't how many elk died. It was how the surviving elk behaved. Areas that had once been safe became dangerous. Open valleys, narrow riverbanks, and forest edges turned into ambush zones. Elk stopped lingering. They avoided certain places entirely. This behavioral change, often called the landscape of fear, reshaped the park. With less constant grazing, plants responded quickly. Willows began to grow taller for the first time in decades. Aspen saplings survived past their vulnerable early years. Cottonwoods returned along streams. Root systems stabilized soil and reduced erosion. Riverbanks became firmer. Shade returned to waterways, lowering water temperatures and improving conditions for fish and insects. These changes triggered another chain reaction. Beavers, which had nearly disappeared from parts of Yellowstone, returned. Beavers rely on willows for both food and building material. As willow stands recovered, beaver populations increased. Beavers built dams that slowed water flow, created ponds, and expanded wetlands. Wetlands stored water during dry seasons, reduced flooding, filtered sediment, and created habitats for amphibians, birds, and mammals. Wolves never built a dam. They never planted a tree. But without them, beavers could not thrive. This is how indirect ecological effects work. One species influences another, which influences another, and the effects ripple outward. Coyotes were affected next. Wolves competed directly with coyotes. After wolves returned, coyote numbers dropped significantly. That allowed smaller predators and many prey species to rebound. Fox populations increased. Rodents became more evenly distributed. Birds of prey benefited from healthier and more stable food sources. The entire mid-level of the ecosystem reorganized itself. Scavengers also benefited. Wolves do not consume entire carcasses. Ravens, magpies, bald eagles, bears, and other animals fed on the remains of wolf kills. In harsh winters, these carcasses became a vital food source. Grizzly bears, emerging weak and hungry from hibernation, often found wolf kills waiting for them. This increased survival during critical periods. Perhaps the most surprising change happened to the rivers themselves. As vegetation returned and erosion slowed, rivers narrowed and deepened. Meanders reappeared. Some streams physically changed their course. The shape of the land shifted. This was not a metaphor. It was geology responding to biology. Scientists call this a trophic cascade. A top predator influences prey behavior, which affects vegetation, which alters soil, water, and physical landscapes. Yellowstone became one of the clearest and most famous real-world examples of this phenomenon. There are important clarifications to make. Wolves did not eliminate elk. Elk still exist in large numbers in Yellowstone. Wolves did not single-handedly restore the park. Climate, fire, and human management also play roles. Not every area recovered at the same speed. Some valleys responded quickly, others slowly. Ecosystems are complex and never perfectly controlled, but the direction changed. Before wolves, Yellowstone was simplifying. After wolves, it became more complex. Biodiversity increased. Interactions multiplied. The system regained resilience. Human perspectives evolved as well. Livestock losses outside the park were real, but lower than many feared and partially compensated through management programs. Wolf watching became a major tourist attraction, drawing visitors from around the world. Yellowstone became a living classroom for ecology, showing that nature is not a collection of independent parts, but a web of relationships. The most important lesson from Yellowstone is not about wolves specifically. It is about what happens when a keystone species is removed. Removing a top predator does not just subtract one animal. It removes pressure, movement, and balance. The consequences spread slowly, quietly, and often invisibly until the system no longer works as intended. Restoring wolves did not freeze Yellowstone into some ideal state. The park continues to change. Wolf populations rise and fall. Elk adapt. Rivers shift again. That is what a healthy system does. It responds. 30 wolves did not dominate Yellowstone. They reorganized it. Through presence, fear, and pressure, they allowed nature to rebuild itself. Sometimes, restoring nature does not mean engineering solutions or massive human intervention. Sometimes it means recognizing what is missing and letting the system remember how to work again.